All right. So up next, let's work on the profile page. So that's going to be the first page in the dashboard that will set it up. Effectively, we're shooting for the form with some inputs. And then the moment we submit the form, we'll perform a HTTP request back to our backend. It's going to be a patch request. And we're going to modify some data about the user. So remember, when we sign up, we provide name, last name, as well as email. And we don't provide the location, but by default on the server, so on my backend, I'm adding some kind of value. And if you want to see that value, just navigate back to your application. And I think the fastest one is going to be a local storage. So go there and you'll notice the email, last name, and notice this location. So by default, the server is going to return this my city and of course the name. So in here, in the profile, we can change those values, including the location. And then later, we can attach this location when we add a potential job. So instead of typing each and every time city such and such, city such and such, we can just add the user city. So let's say if I live in Los Angeles, it kind of makes sense that I'm going to be applying for the jobs in the area. So in the LA area. And therefore, we have this feature where we can change this location. It's going to be used when we submit a potential job. Like I said, it's going to be a patch request back to the server. And when the server responds, we're going to update the values. Let's say if I want to change the name, I type here. I'm going to click on Save Changes. That will trigger the patch request. I have success message, which states user updated. And also I can see in my button that the username changed to a new value. And the same goes for rest of the properties. And of course, I'm not going to showcase them one by one. And as far as the setup, here's what we're shooting for. So in this video, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the page, and then we'll start working on it in the next video. We'll get use state, we'll get form row, because we have a bunch of inputs. We're going to get a wrapper for all the styling. And also, we're going to get the use dispatch and use selector. Since, of course, there's going to be a state value that we're going to be looking for, in our case, user. And also, we'll have to create a new function with create async thunk. Because again, there's going to be an HTTP request back to the server. We're updating this with an API, not just some local data. And also a toast, just in case we have some errors. Then we'll grab the ease loading and user. Again, while we're loading, we'll disable the button. And when it comes to the state, by default, I want to go with an object. And these are going to be values that I'm going to set up. So name, email, last name, and location. And I'm going to take them from the user object in my state. Because at this point, my assumption is that the user has logged in. So if we're in a dashboard, we already have access to the user object. Now, I'll still use this optional chaining because initially it is null. So I'll check if there's a name, please get it. If not, then it's going to be an empty string. But again, since this page will be only visible once the user has logged in, then of course we'll grab those values from the state. And the way the update is going to take place, once we submit the form, we will trigger the patch request. We'll update the user on the server, so on the API, not locally. It will respond. So the server will respond with new updated user object, just like we did when we registered and logged in. And we're going to set up that new user object equal to our user in the user slice. And everywhere where we access the user values, like the button, for example, and for inputs, the new values will be displayed. Then after that, let's keep moving. We have handle submit. For now, we'll just check for the empty values. So name, email, blah, 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 toast error, please fill out all the values and then return. Because eventually, after the if condition will actually set up that request. We'll dispatch it. And we'll also set up handle change. So since we have like 4 inputs, it kind of makes sense if we just group them all together. So there's going to be a handle change that's going to be looking for the event object, and that's the one that will pass into the form row. Now from the event, we'll grab name and value, and again, we'll invoke set user data ... So copy all the values and then just update that one specific one. So when I type the email field, it's going to update the email value in the state. And therefore in here, again, we have the name, and that name needs to match exactly to whatever value we have in the state. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense. So if the value is name, then the name for that attribute needs to be exactly the same. And this is also going to be the first time where we'll implement that label text. Remember when we set up the form row, we added that label text. And now you see perfectly why we need that. Because if I pass here the name equals to a last name, this is going to be displayed in my label. So again, let's take a look at the form row. At the moment, I'm grabbing the name and I'm displaying it over here. However, this is camel case. So it kind of makes sense that we set up a separate prop and I say, look, this is what I want to display. And that's why we call this label text. So of course, before we continue in the form row, we'll say if there is a label text, please use that. If not, then use the name. Again, we'll use the or operator. Let's keep on moving, and then all the way in the bottom, we'll have the button to submit the form. Again, like I said, we're going to check for is loading. We'll set it equal to disabled. So while we are loading, while we're in the middle of request, the user cannot submit. We'll also display the text based on that. And that should do it for the original setup. And then, of course, we'll make things more interesting. We'll set up the HTTP requests and rest of the cool stuff.